What's up guys, Asian here again with another Murkmire PTS video, and today I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring as to these damage shield changes that have happened here, kind of what my take is on it, how I think it's going to affect PvE, PvP, what my opinion is, things like that. So there have already been several videos already put out by a bunch of different content creators looking at the changes for damage shields, what they mean from both a PvE and PvP perspective. So if you guys want to look at a couple of those videos, I believe Fang Rush has one, Outcast has one, so I just thought I'd throw in my opinions and kind of tell you guys what I think is going to happen, whether or not I think these changes are going to stick or not. So for those of you guys who don't know the changes that are happening here, actually let me go ahead and search for them right now. Hope if I spelled shield correctly. So damage shields have been changed in Murkmire PTS. So for now, you can deal crit strike against any damage shield in the game, and then physical and spell resistance reduces incoming damage before it's applied to your damage shield rather than afterwards. I already did a video looking at this perspective. The resistance is now affecting damage shields from PvE perspective. So I'll be talking about how I feel it will be on a PvP perspective. And then poisons and weapon enchants will now proc on damage shield as well. These are kind of generic damage shield changes. However, there are specific damage shield changes that they've introduced in this patch. So for Sork's Conjured Ward is your shield ability. It's under the Daedric Summoning skill line, and now it has a 1 second cast time. So before it was an instant cast, and now it has a 1 second cast time. They did increase the duration of the shield to 9 seconds from 6 seconds to compensate for that cast time. They increased Empowered Ward to 14 compared to 9 seconds. And they also did the exact same change for Annulment and its morph. So this is the Light Armor Shield. So now it also has a 1 second cast time, and the duration of the damage shield has been increased by 50% in order to compensate for that additional cast time. Now, what does this mean for... I'm just going to... a little bit here, but what does this mean for PvP and PvE? It means quite a few things. So I've already kind of talked a little bit about PvE, kind of how the resistance change is generally a buff to damage shields. However, I didn't really touch upon Annulment or Conjured Ward, both skills that are used very heavily in magicka DPS, both by Sorks and non-Sorks alike. This is a big nerf to how shields act, I should say, in PvE. So in PvE right now, a lot of endgame content, VMA, DSA, the vet trials, things like that, even vet DLC dungeons for the more casual players, damage shields act as an emergency protection button, so to speak. So you see you're taking damage, put your shield up so that way you can absorb some damage while your healer gets you up to full, or until you can pop a self heal or something like that. That's how damage shields currently act in the game. Now, from what I understand, I don't really delve into the official forums too much, but from what I understand is that people were complaining that healers didn't feel relevant in 4-man content, which is a problem. Like, you can clear pretty much any 4-man content in the game with 3 DPS and a tank. You don't really need to bring a healer anymore. Part of it is because magicka Nightblades have very good self-heals, but also because DPS is so high that things die before they can do any sort of serious amount of damage to your DPS. So healers didn't really feel too relevant, and one of the things that some people mentioned were that damage shields kind of reduce the impact of healers, reduce the importance of healers, which you can argue is true in some ways, because instead of having to heal through damage, you can just shield through it. But I don't think that is the sole reason, or even the primary reason, why healers feel irrelevant in 4-man content. I think a bigger reason is the fact that DPS is just so high. Also, that magicka Nightblades had Refreshing Path and Funnel Health, which acted as self-heals, and they were very strong heals as well, to not just to the Nightblade, but also to the group as well. So damage shields, while yes, I do think they kind of reduce the importance of healers, I don't think they change the fact that you didn't need to bring a healer into 4-man content. The DPS issue, the power creep basically, and the magicka Nightblade's healing abilities were far bigger impacts on the irrelevance of healers in 4-man content. So that's just kind of from a format content kind of things. Now, looking at something like vet trials, a good example of that a lot of people have brought up in the toxic rating environment Discord is progression guilds running through AS hard mode or even AS +1 with Lothus. If you guys just don't know, Lothus has a special move in Asylum where he targets one random player with Defiling Blast, which hits for pretty hard 3 times. Now, usually what you would do is you block and shield through it. So the shield will eat up some of that damage, and then your block will mitigate whatever's remaining. Now, with the cast time, you can't shield, you can't block while you are casting. So, basically, the idea of shielding for each of the 3 hits no longer applies. So now what happens? You can probably shield through the first hit because you kind of have a second wind-up time for the Defiling Blast. But what about the second and third hits? You can block through it. That's certainly true. I've blocked through 2 hits before without a shield and survived, but you will receive reduced damage because it does apply Major Defile on you. So you could heal through it. You could have a healer focus whoever's targeted by the Defiling Blast. That's not going to solve the issue either then for progression style guilds. At least I don't think it will. So what happens then? A lot of the more casual players, the progression style guilds, the people who are just starting to get into vet trials, they're going to have a much harder time now surviving. So I kind of made a comment on Reddit that was basically like, this is kind of sort of a good thing, but also sort of a bad thing because, now you have to anticipate when damage is happening, which is easier said than done. So for a veteran player like who's run these trials many times, you can anticipate when damage is coming out. You know when Lothus is going to do that Defiling Blast. You know when certain damage is going to be coming at you. Newer players though, people who might not know the mechanics as well, that's going to be a huge learning curve. So survivability on magicka, DPS, on progression guilds, that's going to end up going down because of this additional cast time. Some classes are going to be affected more than others. So Templars, for instance, have a class shield, that's not being affected. DKs have a class shield, that's not being affected by a cast time. But regardless, those scale off of max health, and as a DPS, you're not putting points into health at all. You're not investing into health really all that much. So light armor, the harness magicka, dampen magicka, they scale off of max magicka, so that's why people use them, because you can get much larger shield compared to the blazing radiant ward or something like that, or even healing ward. So overall, this is definitely this change to damage shield, the increase in cast time, is a big nerf for progression and more casual players. It's basically making it a lot harder for them to complete harder content. And while you could argue this is just an L2P issue, just think about your first clear of VMA, whether that was on a STAM or magicka DPS. Now imagine having to do VMA without any shields at all as a magicka DPS. That is basically what you're going to have to do. People like LZH, people like Lyco, myself, we can clear VMA probably without any shields at all. We have self heals, we know our spawn points, and we can clear it, and no issue at all. But for the newer player, the player who's just starting to get into VMA, having that shield there is really important. Stage 2 in particular, without that shield defending you against all that damage, it's going to be a lot tougher. So I don't think this increased cast time is a good idea. I think there's many other ways you could change damage shields so that they are weaker, or you don't have to rely on them as much for survivability. But for PvE, this is a pretty bad direction. I don't like this at all. I think it has to change. I don't think this is going to be pushed through. Unfortunately, ZOS has kind of a history of pushing through unpopular changes, so I'm not 100% optimistic that they'll change this. But if they keep this in the game, they're not hurting the vet players, they're hurting the newer players. So they're really hurting a far larger base population than they think, I think, if these changes go through. Now, for a PvP perspective, Sorks, your tiers are rightfully justified, I think. But at the same time, shield stacking was kind of the main issue here when they made these changes. The idea behind it is make it harder for people to stack shields. That being said, I don't PvP very often. I know several people who do PvP very often. My PvP experience is limited pretty much only to battlegrounds from time to time. I probably only PvP maybe once a month, if that. But even I, as a subpar PvPer, know how to at least a few strategies to counter shield stackers. So, you know, things like bleeds, oblivion damage. So I don't think shield stacking was actually that big of an issue in PvP, but the way that you see things on the official forums, it made it seem like shield stacking was very, very prevalent, especially on Sorks. So that's why the Sork shields got that 1 second cast time, but the other classes did not get that 1 second cast time, because a lot of people on the official forums and on Reddit were crying basically that Sorks were basically invincible because they had their fat shields, and that just wasn't really the case. Once those shields go down, Sorks actually, magicka DPS in general, go down very, very quickly because they have to rely on sustain sets most of the time. They aren't able to run heavy sets like stamina DPS can and still maintain good levels of damage and survivability at the same time. So Sorks kind of had to rely on their shields in order to more or less gain that survivability. Of course, there are still shields in the game that doesn't have a cast time. So, for example, healing ward ally. A lot of magicka DPS on PvP run resto staff backbar, so you'll just see them swap over to something like ward ally instead, rather than using like annulment or something. So I don't think it really solves the issue of shield stacking, because, you know, let's say I run a mag decay usually in PvP now. I used to run a stam decay and I converted to mag decay. So now I can just do something like igneous shields, and then I can pop my healing ward, and there you go. I have 2 shields. They're stacked. I'm stacking shield. I'm shield stacking. So that doesn't solve the issue at all. Adding a cast time to annulment, that doesn't solve the shield stacking issue for PvP. So even on a PvP standpoint, this is coming from somebody who's inexperienced in PvP. I don't consider myself an expert. I think I'm more of like a low mid-tier, high low tier PvP player, so not really good. But even I know that shield stacking, you know, there are several counterplays you can do to it, and, you know, I just don't like these changes. The other thing with Sorks too is that you kind of have to line up burst potential. So with that shield, you have your 6 seconds of basically your window to kind of burst people down. And once the shield goes down, you're pretty much very squishy, because again, you're wearing sustain sets, which tend to be light armor sets, you know, lich or something like that. And so, you know, that doesn't really help things. Plus, magicka DPS, a lot of damage reduction, damage mitigation, avoiding damage in PvP involves dodge rolling and blocking. Magicka DPS don't really have that much stamina to begin with. So, you know, they can maybe do 3, maybe 4 dodge rolls, depending on how much you spec into reducing the cost of dodge roll in the green CP trees. But, you know, compared to stam DPS, where you can dodge roll far more often because you just have a larger stam pool, it's just, you know, all in all, like, magicka DPS in PvP, you know, they lost a good amount of survivability, and I don't think this is the right way to do it. Do I think shield stacking was an issue? I think it was a small issue. I do think something should be done with shields. If shield stacking is the issue that they're trying to address here, there's plenty of other things they could do to kind of address the damage shield, the shield stacking issue here. They could, you know, reduce the effectiveness of a shield, your second shield or something. They could make it so your second shield will always override your first shield, so basically they cancel each other out. Or, you know, they could increase the cost if you of a shield if you already have a shield up or something like that. You know, there's plenty of other ways you can counterplay or balance out shield stacking if that's what you're trying to combat. That doesn't involve basically nerfing magicka's DPS survivability in PvE at the same time. So overall, I don't like these damage shield changes. I think it pretty much put a nail in the Sork's coffin, or put a nail, I should say. There's plenty of other things that Sorks have to deal with right now in PvE. But these changes pretty much make Mag Sorks pretty much a dead class, I would say, in PvE for DPS, both for magicka DPS. At this point now, they didn't fix Sork sustain, or they didn't balance Sork sustain again. So Sorks in general, they I don't want to go as far as to say they're dead, completely dead, because you still want Sorks for their conduit synergies, and you could run a Sork healer, but you could also run a Sork DPS. But they definitely got hit hard in PvE this patch, and there's already been discussion that Magplars, just because of the changes that have happened to Magplars, they're going to end up being, you know, much more popular in PvE, DPS, range DPS, so the Magplars and Mag Nightblades. So overall, these changes are really bad. I don't like them. I think there's much better ways that they could nerf or rebalance damage shields. But I'm not a game developer, I'm not a class rep, I have no real window into what ZOS is thinking about or anything like that, what they're planning. So the only thing I can hope for is that they realize this is a bad change and they do something else to rebalance it in not next week, but the following week, on week 3 of the PTS, where the balance changes come in. But people who like Alcast's video that basically said ZOS killed Sorks, he's not entirely incorrect here. I think it's a little bit of exaggeration, but I think I think he has the right idea. I think his thesis sentence, if it was an essay, is correct. That Sorks got hit really hard with this. Magicka DPS in general got hit hard in terms of survivability in PvE and PvP content. And despite the fact that, yes, resistances now count for your reducing damage that you take when you have a damage shield up as well, that doesn't offset the fact that you have that cast time, you can be interrupted during the casting time, and all this nonsense, which doesn't really even solve, I think, the issue that people are complaining about in PvP. So overall, bad change. I don't like it. Hopefully they'll change it. So that is it. So hopefully you guys found this video informative. Please let me know what you guys think about these damage shield changes. I've already had a couple of comments from you guys saying that this is a bad change, and I wholeheartedly agree. So I just kind of want to see if you guys have any ideas maybe for damage shield changes. The OFA is on the toxic rating environment. You can always go on to one of the class rep discords and voice your opinions there. And hopefully the class reps will be able to bring this to ZOS and kind of open their eyes a little bit. So please leave comments down below as to what you think about all this stuff. And I will have also links down in the description below to a couple of videos of other content creators who put in their opinions on these new damage shield changes. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.